A Roman soldier devoted 25 years of his life to the army. That's a quarter century of non-stop marching, building camps, and bloody battles. But few people wonder what happened to these men afterward. Those who survived such a long service were more like iron machines than ordinary people. And this is where the most interesting part of our story begins. Modern people retire at 65. They receive a gold watch, a modest pension, and plenty of free time. For the Romans, things were completely different. They left service at 45, full of strength and unique combat experience. By ancient standards, this was already a very respectable age. But imagine the condition of this 45-year-old veteran. His knees creaked from the thousands of miles he'd marched in heavy leather sandals. His shoulders were covered in scars from blows by Germanic axes and Gallic swords. This man literally knew how to do nothing but kill and build. Sounds like the perfect neighbor for a summer cottage, doesn't it? This state promised these men the moon for their boundless loyalty. They were guaranteed generous land grants in the best corners of the vast empire. They were promised substantial cash payments comparable to several years' wages. They were even granted official Roman citizenship if they served in the auxiliary troops. But this is where reality changed. Reality often turned out to be much harsher than any of the Roman emperor's fine promises. The land might be nothing but a barren patch of rock. It could lie at the very edge of barbarian territory. Money could instantly lose its value due to yet another civil war or the greed of officials. And citizenship did not save them from the contempt of Rome's native inhabitants. Suddenly, returning home became the hardest trial in any legionnaire's life. Many veterans simply could not adapt to a peaceful and quiet existence. Your modern office requires a degree and knowledge of boring Excel spreadsheets. Peaceful life in Rome required the ability to grow wheat and trade it at the market. And our hero was used to solving problems with a gladius and a military march. My hands start to ache just from the thought of such a drastic career change. As a result, a huge portion of these professional killers returned to the camps. They voluntarily signed a new contract because the army was their only home. These men were called Evocati, and they were the true and absolute elite of the legions. Modern military psychologists would call this the most severe form of institutionalization. The Romans, however, simply considered it an excellent way to retain experienced military personnel. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at the anatomy of the Roman military pension. We'll find out exactly how the empire rewarded its best and most resilient fighters. We'll understand why getting land was harder than surviving a battle against the Celts. You'll see how the ancient problems of veterans are strikingly similar to our modern ones. Get ready for this forgotten Roman history. This will be a truly fascinating dive into forgotten history. You'll learn why the Roman pension cost the state an absolutely staggering amount of money. The sums were so colossal that emperors had to invent new taxes. Sometimes the treasury was literally emptied due to the urgent need to pay demobilized soldiers. This is not an exaggeration or typo. Veterans could easily bankrupt the greatest empire of their time. Let's figure out how this crazy but surprisingly ingenious system worked. We'll walk the entire path alongside our hypothetical weary legionnaire. From the ceremonial presentation of his bronze diploma to his attempts to grow cabbage in rocky soil. You'll understand why so many of them were happy to leave their farms behind for good. Believe me, after this story your office routine will seem like a pleasant vacation. So let's travel back 2,000 years and see it all with our own eyes. 25 years of service had finally come to their logical end. Our legionnaire had survived, which in itself was already a true statistical miracle. Now, he was about to undergo the procedure of so-called honorable and well-deserved discharge. The Romans called this by the beautiful and proud Latin term honesta missio. In essence, it was the main bureaucratic celebration in the life of any ancient soldier. The discharge ceremony was conducted with incredible pomp and military solemnity. A special imperial decree terminating the soldier's contract was read aloud before the ranks. The soldier was handed 2 small bronze plaques, securely fastened with copper wire. This was the famous Roman military diploma confirming all his new rights. Compared with it, a modern passport looked pitiful and fragile. It was little more than a piece of cardboard. These plaques were engraved with the entire service record of the weary veteran. The plates listed his name, his unit, and his emperor. That emperor had granted him his long-awaited freedom. This heavy bronze object was the most valuable item in his knapsack. Without it, he was just a vagabond with a sword. With it, he was a respected man. The Romans adored strict bureaucracy, long before the advent of modern government services. But here it gets even more interesting, and much more complicated for the soldiers. Receiving the discharge certificate didn't mean the soldier could simply pack up and leave. Often the discharge process dragged on for months due to a lack of funds in the treasury. Commanders deliberately dragged their feet to keep experienced fighters in the field a little longer. Imagine your boss refusing to let you go until you finish one more annual report. Legionnaires hated these delays and sometimes staged incredibly violent mutinies. They persistently demanded their pay and the right to finally take off their heavy armor. Emperors had to intervene personally to calm the enraged men with weapons. No one wanted to mess with thousands of professional killers who hadn't been paid. This very problem had changed the balance of power in Rome more than once. When the stubborn bureaucracy finally gave in, the soldier received his severance pay. Initially, this was simply a generous land grant in a recently conquered province. But over time, good unclaimed land became scarcer and scarcer. Therefore, Emperor Octavian Augustus introduced a fixed cash payment for all retiring veterans. He simply realized quite brilliantly that handing out money was safer than taking land away from farmers. This payment was called the militia bonus, and was a truly enormous sum. In different eras, it ranged from 3,000 to 5,000 silver denarii. The scale of this payment was enormous. It equaled 12 years of wages for an ordinary laborer. Sounds like excellent startup capital for a new life of luxury, doesn't it? Any modern retiree would be very envious of such a golden parachute from the state. However, the Roman economy was always full of unpleasant and unpredictable surprises. Inflation could eat away at some of that money on the long journey home. Furthermore, the legionary had to pay for his own travel expenses to his new place of residence. Travel in antiquity was insanely expensive. It was also incredibly dangerous because of bandits. By the time he arrived at his destination, often only pitiful crumbs remained of his vast wealth. Nevertheless, for many, this was their only chance to escape total poverty. Poor village youths entered the army as ragged paupers. Those who survived could return as respected wealthy men. They bought beautiful and expensive clothes and tried to pass themselves off as aristocrats. The locals looked at them with a mixture of animal fear and undisguised envy. And to be honest, this fear of veterans was always quite justified. Ahead of our veteran lay the most difficult stage of his earthly existence. He was about to transform from a COG in the war machine into an ordinary civilian. The transition was far more painful. It felt worse than a forced march with a full pack. Surviving a battle against the Celts is a difficult and bloody business. But surviving in peaceful Roman society is a completely different, more subtle article. The main dream of every Roman soldier was always to own a fertile farm. In antiquity, land was the absolute synonym for stability, wealth, and high social status. The state was well aware of this, and actively used land as the perfect bait. Essentially, legionaries were sold a beautiful picture of an unattainable rural idyll. Just like modern brochures for residential complexes, where everything always looks flawlessly perfect. But harsh reality dealt a crushing blow to these naive soldiers' dreams. Instead of fertile vineyards in Italy, veterans were often given plots on the empire's borders. These were wild wastelands where wolves howled at night and barbarians attacked by day. The soil could be brutally rocky. A shovel might break on the very first attempt. So much for a well-deserved rest after 25 years of endless bloodshed. Why did the state treat its best defenders so cynically and cruelly? The answer lies in the ingenious, yet calculating strategy of the Roman emperors. By settling veterans on dangerous frontiers, they killed two major birds with one stone. First, they cleverly saved expensive Italian land for the local ruling elite. Second, Rome created a living shield of experienced fighters. They stood directly in the path of future invaders. Imagine this perfect state scheme in action. Barbarians cross the border and want to quickly plunder a defenseless, peaceful Roman village. But instead of frightened peasants, they are met by fierce men with scars and hidden gladiuses. This was a brutal border patrol that didn't even need to be paid a salary. Modern politicians would do well to learn such cynical efficiency from ancient Roman strategists. The problem was that veterans often had no idea how to run a farm. They knew how to march in formation, build bridges, and stab the enemy in the gut. But when it came to sowing wheat and milking goats, their skills proved utterly useless. A modern special forces soldier is also unlikely to immediately become a successful farmer or agronomist. Agriculture requires deep knowledge passed down through generations, not the ability to maintain formation. As a result, many newly minted farmers quickly went bankrupt and lost everything. They took out unfavorable loans from local moneylenders to buy seeds and draft animals. The harvest perished from drought, while their debts continued to grow rapidly and inexorably. As a result, veterans were forced to sell their hard-earned plots of land for pittances. Their land was bought up by wealthy senators who turned small farms into vast agricultural plantations. This led to widespread and very dangerous discontent among former soldiers. He had killed for the empire for 25 years. Then he found himself penniless on the street. Such desperate people quickly became easy prey for any political opportunist. If some ambitious general promised them new lands, they gladly took up arms. This is exactly how the most destructive and bloody civil wars in Roman history began. To avoid such uprisings, the state began settling veterans together, creating entire colonies. These new towns consisted exclusively of former comrades in arms and their families. In essence, these were giant military bases, disguised as ordinary, peaceful settlements. The legionaries simply carried their strict military discipline over into civilian life. They elected their old commanders as mayors and built streets according to military standards. A very special, incredibly harsh atmosphere always reigned in such colonies. There was no room for weakness here, and all domestic conflicts were resolved quickly and harshly. A local might try to cheat a veteran at the market. That mistake could bring enormous trouble. The soldiers always stood together like a rock. They had learned this habit inside the ranks. The local civilian population tried to give these peculiar settlements a wide berth. Life on the farm turned out to be nothing like the paradise the legionaries had dreamed of. Many of them fondly recalled the clear and orderly routine of army life. In the legion, food was not his daily concern. Rations arrived as long as he followed orders. Inside the legion, everything remained simple. Follow orders, stay in formation, and receive your rations. And this nagging longing for simplicity soon became a widespread phenomenon throughout the empire. For half of the Roman army, a pension meant something far greater than just money. We are talking about the soldiers of the auxiliary forces, the so-called auxiliaries. These were people from conquered tribes, Gauls, brave Thracians, Syrians, and rugged Germans. They were not Roman citizens and were considered second-class, if not third-class, citizens. But the army gave them a unique chance to rectify this glaring social injustice. The rules of this game were extremely simple and incredibly cruel at the same time. Serve 25 years, survive dozens of battles, and you would receive the coveted citizenship. For a modern person, a passport from another country is simply a matter of paperwork, money and time. In antiquity, Roman citizenship was a golden key that opened absolutely every door. It granted the right to vote, enter into legal contracts, and avoid humiliating corporal punishment. A full Roman citizen could not be tortured or flogged without a trial. An ordinary provincial, however, could be thrown into prison simply on a bureaucrat's whim. That is why barbarians flocked to the Roman army, willingly risking their own lives. They wanted to become full-fledged members of the very empire that had once conquered their lands. This is a perfect historical example of how the system assimilated its former sworn enemies. And here lies the most remarkable legal nuance of that harsh era. Citizenship was granted not only to the surviving veteran himself, but also to his children. Thus, a single ordinary soldier could radically change the fate of his entire future lineage. His grandchildren could become wealthy merchants, respected lawyers, or even distinguished Roman senators. The state literally bought the loyalty of future generations at the cost of one specific person's blood. The process of obtaining these rights was recorded in that very famous bronze diploma. The veteran returned to his native barbarian village as a local, untouchable hero. He donned a white toga, which only full-fledged Romans had the legal right to wear. His neighbors looked upon him with incredible respect and undisguised reverence. He was living proof that Rome's system of social mobility truly worked. But here a perfectly natural and logical question arises for the modern person. Why did proud Rome so generously grant its exclusive rights to former foreigners? Because the vast empire desperately needed loyal people on its farthest frontiers. A veteran with citizenship instantly became a bastion of Roman culture in the wild lands. He built a house in the Roman style, spoke Latin, and worshipped the Roman gods. The locals looked at him and wanted to live exactly the same way. They saw that serving Rome brought real rewards, not just wounds and death. As a result, the process of Romanizing the provinces proceeded at an incredibly rapid and effective pace. Modern politicians call this soft power and thoughtful cultural expansion. The Romans simply gave people citizenship in exchange for 25 years of slave labor. However, this legal status also created a host of dangerous everyday problems. Local leaders often hated returning veterans for their arrogance and new privileges. A veteran could refuse to pay local taxes, brazenly citing his status as a citizen. This sparked fierce conflicts that sometimes ended in mass brawls. Joining the village elite brought status. It could be as dangerous as the legion's front line. Many auxiliaries preferred not to return to their wild hometowns at all. They settled near their former military camps, where everyone was absolutely equal. There they opened taverns, smithies, or became loan sharks for new, naive recruits. The military camp attracted a surrounding civilian settlement. Over time, that settlement grew into a major city. Many modern European cities, such as Vienna or Cologne, grew out of precisely such settlements. Ultimately, this ingenious system transformed the demographic landscape of all of ancient Europe. Rome ceased to be merely a city for the elite and became a global idea. Yesterday's barbarians became the most ardent and loyal defenders of Roman values and laws. They took far greater pride in their status than those born in Rome itself, and this was the greatest unseen achievement of the Roman state apparatus. Now, let's talk about the most scandalous and hushed-up secret of the Roman army. Under strict law, active legionaries were categorically forbidden from entering into official marriage. Emperor Augustus decided that a soldier should love only the empire and his commander with boundless devotion. A wife and children were considered an unnecessary burden that distracted from marches and grueling training. But human nature cannot be abolished by any decree, not even the strictest imperial edict. Therefore, soldiers en masse formed unofficial families with local provincial women. These women lived in civilian settlements, right outside the stone walls of the military camps. Legionaries secretly ran to them at night, violating absolutely every possible regulation. The officers understood what was happening. They wisely chose to ignore these forbidden relationships. After all, even the sternest commanders needed rest and the comforts of home. But legally, these relationships were an absolute disaster for everyone involved. A woman was considered merely a cohabitant, with no legal rights to property. Children from such unions were deemed illegitimate and inherited nothing from their father. If a soldier died in battle, his secret family could literally end up on the street. It was a cruel price to pay for trying to lead a normal life while on duty. The situation changed only on the day the soldier retired. That very coveted bronze certificate performed a real and long-awaited legal miracle. It contained a special clause that retroactively legalized the veteran's marriage. All of his illegitimate children instantly became legal heirs and full-fledged citizens. For that moment alone, it was worth enduring a quarter-century of endless military hardships. Sounds like a classic Hollywood happy ending, doesn't it? But imagine this bureaucratic and psychological nightmare in real life. A woman waited 25 years not knowing if her husband would return from yet another campaign. She raised children who, on paper, didn't even have a proper father. Modern couples get divorced over a forgotten anniversary, yet these people endured decades of uncertainty. The marriage finally became official. The veteran became the legally recognized head of the household. Under Roman law, this status gave him absolute power over his wife and children. He could execute them, sell them into slavery, or expel them from the home without explanation. Yesterday's powerless soldier suddenly turned into a domestic tyrant with unlimited authority. For many families, this transition proved to be a real and very difficult psychological ordeal. Moreover, veterans were often men with shattered psyches and difficult temperaments. Modern medicine calls this post-traumatic stress disorder, or simply PTSD. The Romans didn't know such fancy terms, but they clearly saw and understood the consequences. Former legionaries sometimes woke screaming during the night. They drank cheap wine and displayed sudden aggression. Living under the same roof with such a difficult person was incredibly hard. The wives of veterans deserve a monument of their own for their incredible resilience and patience. Their wives had managed the entire household. Their husbands had spent years guarding the empire's frontier. They managed the finances, traded in the markets, and solved absolutely every domestic problem. A returning husband often found an independent businesswoman. He had to relearn life with a woman who needed no protection. Many sons of veterans chose the path of their renowned and stern fathers. They joined the same legions because it was a long-standing family tradition. The state even actively encouraged such volunteers by offering them additional bonuses upon enlistment. Entire military dynasties emerged, where the dangerous profession of a legionary was passed down from generation to generation. For these boys, the army was the only understandable and logical path in life. Ultimately, the foolish ban on marriage was repealed by Emperor Septimius Severus. He simply acknowledged the obvious fact: soldiers would start families anyway, at any cost. This wise decision radically changed the face of the Roman army once and for all. Legionaries ceased to be mobile strike forces and became settled border guards with a host of relatives. For early imperial veterans, this change mattered enormously. Legal family recognition became one of retirement's greatest rewards. And now we come to the most paradoxical phenomenon of the Roman military system. Having received land, money, and citizenship, a huge percentage of veterans gave it all up. They packed their belongings, took their old gladius, and returned to the army. They returned to the army voluntarily. After 25 years of sheer hell, they were literally begging for more. To a modern person, this seems like absolute madness and a complete lack of logic. Imagine winning the lottery and buying a seaside home. Then imagine voluntarily returning to a hard factory. But for a Roman soldier, there was a deep practical sense to this strange decision. Civilian life seemed unbearably boring, unfair, and incredibly complicated to them. In the army, everything was crystal clear. Inside the army, there was always an order. There was always a clearly defined enemy. And there were comrades beside him. Such returning veterans were called Evocati, which translated to recalled. They enjoyed immense and unquestioned respect among both the rank and file and the senior officers. Their status was something between a senior warrant officer and an elite special forces soldier. They no longer dug trenches or stood night watch in the freezing rain. They were saved for the most critical and bloody moments of the upcoming decisive battle. The army paid the Evocati several times more than ordinary legionaries. They received the best rations, comfortable tents, and the right to wear special insignia. Their task was to pass experience to younger soldiers. They also preserved discipline during critical moments. Young recruits panicked before the screaming Celtic horde. The old veterans simply stood there and grinned. Their icy calm steadied the rest of the army. No commander's speech could produce the same effect. Commanders personally persuaded many old veterans. They wanted these proven men back in the ranks. Julius Caesar assembled entire units from such men who knew no fear at all. They loved war, they understood war, and they didn't want to do anything else. To them, the sound of the battle horn was more pleasing than any urban civilian music. You could call it an addiction to adrenaline, long before the scientific discovery of adrenaline itself. In addition, Evocati often served as modern-day military engineers and instructors. They could build an impregnable camp from simple materials. They could also construct a siege tower. Young, ambitious centurions often consulted these gray-haired veterans before making difficult decisions. In essence, the entire invisible infrastructure of the Roman military machine rested on their strong shoulders. Without their experience, the mighty legions would have turned into nothing more than a mob of armed men. Returning to the army also solved the main psychological problem for the old veterans. They no longer had to try to fit into a peaceful society that was foreign to them. In the camp, they were surrounded by equally tough men with similar psychological traumas. They spoke the same slang, laughed at the same jokes, and understood each other without words. It was the largest and most successful psychological support group in the ancient world. Veterans were also entitled to a huge share of the spoils of war after successful campaigns. An ordinary soldier might receive only a few silver coins. A veteran could carry home a chest of gold. Many of them amassed colossal fortunes by plundering conquered territories. They became richer than some Roman senators, simply by doing what they did best. It was a bloody, but incredibly profitable and effective ancient business. However, the end of most Evocati lives was rarely peaceful and serene. They continued to fight until old age slowed their honed reflexes, and at that fateful moment, luck usually turned its back on them on the battlefield. A young barbarian could still kill them. Their tired arms could no longer hold the heavy shield, but for most of them, this was a far more desirable death than wasting away in bed. The phenomenon of the Evocati proves one simple historical truth that remains relevant today. You can take a man out of war. Taking war out of the man is nearly impossible. The system created ideal soldiers, but it was completely incapable of returning them to normal life. Rome paid for security by turning its citizens into lifelong hostages of war. And this cynical bargain worked flawlessly for many hundreds of years. Let's face the truth and assess the physical condition of our weary hero. 25 years of service in antiquity left irreparable and terrible scars on his body. A Roman soldier had no access to modern surgeons, antibiotics, or advanced physical therapists. His medical record consisted of scars, misaligned bones, and chronic pain. Retirement often turned into a daily struggle against his own rapidly deteriorating body. The most common problem among veterans was completely destroyed leg joints. Roman sandals, the famous caligae, were excellent footwear for marching, but they offered no cushioning. Thousands of miles on stone roads destroyed their knees. Heavy backpacks made every step even more damaging. Modern orthopedic surgeons would be horrified to see an X-ray of a typical legionnaire. These men literally ground their cartilage to dust for the sake of the empire's fleeting glory. In addition, nearly every veteran suffered from serious vision and hearing problems. Biting wind and marching dust damaged them for decades. Campfire smoke added another constant burden. The deafening clang of swords against shields during battles left many soldiers half-deaf. No one issued them tactical goggles or noise-canceling headphones before a brutal battle. They returned home squinting and constantly asking their irritated conversation partners to repeat themselves. The Legionnaires' stomachs were also a veritable zone of physiological disaster. A diet consisting of coarse grain, vinegar, and salted meat guaranteed chronic gastritis. Roman doctors treated stomach ailments with herbal decoctions and wine, which often only made matters worse. Today, we take pills at the slightest sign of heartburn, but they endured this pain for years. A veteran's digestive system was as strong as steel, but just as hopelessly worn out. Battle wounds created lifelong consequences. Ancient treatment methods were often harsh and painful. Roman doctors were incredibly skilled for their time, but they couldn't perform miracles. Wounds were stitched with coarse thread. Infections were burned with hot iron, or washed with cheap wine. Many soldiers carried broken weapon fragments inside their bodies. Others lived with buried arrowheads for the rest of their lives. These old injuries would start to ache terribly at the slightest change in the weather. It's ironic that the state offered no compensation for these injuries after retirement. If you survived and managed to make it home, that was entirely your own problem. Rome had no Ministry of Veterans Affairs or free rehabilitation clinics. Disabled veterans depended on relatives or former comrades. Others begged for alms on filthy streets. A proud warrior could end up begging on filthy streets. To him, that felt worse than an honorable battlefield death. Nevertheless, the life expectancy of surviving legionaries is mind-boggling. Tomb researchers often find gravestones of veterans who lived to be 70 or 80 years old. It sounds unbelievable, but the evidence remains. But let's consider why these maimed men lived so incredibly long. The answer lies in the brutal natural selection they successfully endured in their youth. The army mercilessly killed all weak, sick and genetically vulnerable soldiers in the very first years. Those who lived to see retirement possessed phenomenal natural endurance and a powerful immune system. Their bodies might be covered in scars. Their internal organs could still work like clockwork. Modern trainers would call this an extreme form of genetic and physical survival. These old men could survive any epidemic simply because their bodies refused to die. In peacetime, this incredible resilience often became their main and only asset. Veterans opened gladiator schools or became personal bodyguards for wealthy politicians. No sensible person challenged an old, deaf veteran. He remained incredibly dangerous despite his age. Their brutal reputation became free and effective advertising. It worked in a society that respected raw force. A Roman veteran's health was a brutal paradox. It combined incredible strength with complete physical ruin. He could break a robber's neck with his bare hands. Yet he might barely leave bed in the morning. The state used their bodies as expendable material, squeezing every last drop out of them, and when only an empty shell remained, it was simply spat out into civilian life. But these shells turned out to be made of the most durable material in the ancient world. Now consider veterans who chose a more cunning path. They avoided farming and searched for profitable ventures. Some veterans realized that farming was a sure path to poverty and ruin. Instead of buying a plow, they invested their bonus money in more profitable and dangerous ventures. They became tough ancient businessmen, leveraging their military connections and ruthlessness. And here, their skills in intimidation and strategic planning proved to be just what was needed. The most popular business among former legionnaires was opening roadside taverns and inns. They built them right on the very roads they themselves had once paved with heavy stone. The tavern owner knew all the passing couriers, officers, and wealthy merchants in the area. In essence, these establishments became informal hubs for gathering information and local gossip. The modern hotel business looks like a mere innocent child's play compared to these dens. But here lies the real intrigue of this ancient crisis management strategy. Veteran taverns often served as a reliable cover for illegal trade and smuggling across the empire's borders. Few customs officers dared inspect a veteran centurion's wagon. His old legionary reputation protected the cargo. The soldiers knew all the secret paths and loopholes in the border security system inside out. They turned the state security into their own personal and highly profitable business venture. The second most common practice was usury, or lending money at exorbitant interest rates. Veterans had cash on hand, which ordinary peasants were always desperately short of. They lent money at astronomical interest rates, sometimes reaching a staggering 50% per year. If a debtor couldn't pay, bailiffs didn't come knocking with neat paperwork. An old legionnaire would show up with a club and simply take his house. This provoked immense and entirely justified hatred from the local civilian population. People no longer saw veterans as heroic defenders. They saw cruel parasites profiting from civilian suffering. Often, former soldiers had to hire guards from among other demobilized soldiers to protect their wealthy homes. Genuine mafia-like clans emerged, controlling entire districts in provincial Roman cities. Ironically, the very people called upon to uphold the law often became its chief violators. Another lucrative business involved large-scale supplies of provisions for the active army. An old soldier knew exactly what a legion required. That included grain, leather, and equipment for campaigns. Veterans bought goods cheaply from struggling peasants. They sold them back to the army at triple prices. They easily bribed quartermasters with whom they had recently sat around the same campfire. This scheme of kickbacks and bribes worked just as flawlessly as modern corrupt tenders. The most ambitious and wealthy among them invested in logistics and maritime transport. They bought small merchant ships and transported olive oil or expensive wine to Rome. It was an incredibly risky business, due to frequent storms and ruthless Mediterranean pirates. He had survived the massacre in the Teutoburg forest. A few ragged bandits could hardly frighten him. Their ships were often armed and protected, no less effectively than regular military galleys. Thanks to these business schemes, A new powerful class of wealthy people was emerging. Successful veterans educated their children with the best teachers. Classical learning prepared them for higher status. They studied rhetoric, philosophy, and Greek, preparing for a great political career. The grandson of a simple peasant could become an intellectual. His family had risen through blood, service, and wealth. This was the very essence of the great Roman dream, in its pure ST form. However, it is worth noting that such successful entrepreneurs were an absolute minority. Most veterans drank away their bonuses too quickly or fell prey to swindlers. Killing enemies did not teach financial judgment. Many veterans could not understand complex commercial contracts. Many returned to appalling poverty just a couple of years after their triumphant discharge. Capitalism in the ancient world was just as ruthless as the hordes of barbarian tribes. As a result, a veteran's economic fate depended entirely on his cunning and luck. The state gave them a powerful financial start, but taught them absolutely nothing about managing that money. This is very similar to modern athletes who go bankrupt a year after ending a brilliant career. The Roman system was perfect at creating soldiers, but terrible at creating citizens. And this problem remained unresolved until the very fall of the great empire. The story of Roman military retirees is not just a boring tale from dusty academic textbooks. It is an incredibly vivid mirror reflecting the problems of our own modern society. Humanity built smartphones and sent people to the moon, yet returning soldiers to civilian life remains difficult. And therein lies the saddest irony of all world military history. We saw how the state clumsily tried to buy off its defenders with money and land. We witnessed how these promises shattered against harsh reality and inevitable economic crises. The Roman system of honesta missio was conceived as the ideal reward for loyalty and bravery, but in practice it became a trial that proved more difficult than any battle against enemies. A world without orders became their hardest challenge. Many Roman legionaries never mastered that kind of freedom. The phenomenon of the Evocati vividly demonstrates that war changes the human psyche forever. People accustomed to adrenaline and military brotherhood simply could not become ordinary, boring farmers. They preferred to risk their lives every day rather than face civilian routine. This is a frightening but entirely logical consequence of the ruthless machine Rome created. Soldiers became eternal hostages to their own profession and their own strength. These veterans became the glue of the vast empire. They carried Roman culture into the remotest provinces. They spread Roman culture, language and harsh laws to the remotest corners of Europe. They built taverns, married local women, and raised new citizens of Rome. Without their unseen peaceful work, the empire would have fallen apart much more quickly. They turned out to be the best diplomats, simply because it was physically impossible to oppose them. Legal maneuvers involving marriages and citizenship also left a huge mark on world history. Rome showed the whole world how bureaucracy could be used to assimilate entire peoples. The issuance of bronze diplomas was a brilliant marketing move by the ancient government. The bronze tablets themselves cost almost nothing. Men still sacrificed 25 years of life to receive them. Truly, the most profitable deal in the history of public administration of all time. Their medical suffering demands deep respect. It reveals the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Veterans continue to live and work with injuries that today are considered severe disabilities. They did not demand sympathy, but simply gritted their teeth and carried on with their work. Their endurance became a legend that outlived the empire itself by many centuries. Their resilience belonged to another human world. Modern people can barely comprehend its scale. The financial successes and failures of former soldiers brilliantly illustrate the very essence of the ancient economy. From racketeering to international trade, they tried everything to survive in civilian life. And while many lost everything, some managed to found powerful and incredibly wealthy dynasties. The Roman army truly functioned as the most powerful social ladder of its harsh era. It was a dirty and bloody path to the top, but at least it actually existed. When office work feels exhausting, remember this veteran. He was 45, injured, and carrying only a bronze plaque. Remember how he returned to guard duty because he couldn't grow cabbage. Believe me, after that, your problems with reports and deadlines won't seem so bad. History always knows how to put our modern difficulties into the right sobering perspective. Rome spent fortunes creating the world's best killing machine. It never learned how to shut that machine down safely. And that is the main lesson modern politicians must learn from the history of the legions. It is not enough simply to win a war and hand out fancy commemorative medals to people. You have to be able to give them back the very lives they defended with their weapons. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden side of Roman history. We took off the shiny armor and looked at real people with their real problems. History isn't just about the dates of great battles and the names of mad Roman emperors. It's the stories of ordinary guys trying to find their place under the scorching ancient sun. See you again on our channel, where history truly comes alive and makes sense.